She has won Grand Slams. She has built business empires. She has fought through illness, injury, and every kind of adversity this sport can throw at a person. And after more than 3 decades in professional tennis, Venus Williams has earned the right to say exactly what she thinks. So, when Venus opens her mouth and speaks about how champions should carry themselves, the tennis world stops and listens. And recently, what she said sent shockwaves through the entire sport. Because this time, Venus Williams was not handing out compliments. She was setting a standard, and not everyone was going to meet it. Venus Williams is not just a tennis legend. She is a blueprint, a Grand Slam champion, a trailblazer who fundamentally changed what women's tennis could look like, a successful businesswoman, and one of the most respected voices the sport has ever produced. She has stood on the biggest stages in the world and delivered under pressure that would break most athletes. She has also experienced heartbreak, disappointment, and the kind of losses that stay with you long after the cameras have gone. That combination, the victories, the defeats, and everything in between is exactly what makes her perspective so powerful. When Venus talks about professionalism, sportsmanship, and how elite athletes should handle difficult moments, she is not guessing. She is speaking from experience, decades of it, under the brightest spotlight tennis has ever seen. And recently, that experience brought her straight into one of the most talked about conversations in women's tennis right now. Venus found herself at the center of a major debate after commenting on Aryna Sabalenka and the way top players respond to setbacks.
Let's be absolutely clear about something. Her remarks were not intended as praise. They were not a warm embrace or a show of solidarity. They were something far more pointed. Venus essentially argued that true champions are defined not only by how they perform when everything is going their way, but also, and perhaps more importantly, by how they respond when things fall apart. Handling defeat with grace, accountability, and respect is not optional at the elite level. According to Venus, it is part of the job. It is a lesson she carried throughout her own legendary career and one she believes every serious competitor must eventually learn. Now, to understand why those comments landed with such force, you have to understand the moment Sabalenka is living in right now. Expectations surrounding the world's top players have never been higher. Every performance is dissected. Every interview is analyzed. Every emotional reaction becomes a headline before the post-match press conference is even finished. For Sabalenka specifically, that scrutiny has been relentless. Fans and media are not just watching her results on the court, they are watching everything that comes after. How she walks into the interview room, what she says, what her face looks like when she says it. The pressure of being one of the biggest names in women's tennis is enormous, and every single public moment feeds into a much larger conversation about who she is as a champion and as a competitor. That is the environment in which Venus's comments arrived. And what made them even more fascinating was what came alongside them, because Venus was not just speaking in the abstract, she was simultaneously revealing her decision to partner with Alex at the Hamburg tournament ahead of the Wimbledon season. And when you put those two things together, her criticism of how Sabalenka handles adversity and her deliberate choice to align herself with Alex, the message becomes almost impossible to miss. For Venus, success in tennis has never been solely about talent or rankings or the ability to hit a ball harder than anyone on the other side of the net. She has always believed that character, resilience, and professionalism are what separate good players from truly great ones. And by choosing Alex as her partner, Venus was putting that belief into action.
Alex's rise in professional tennis has been one of the most compelling stories the sport has produced in recent years. She has built her momentum not through flashy dominance or instant stardom, but through relentless determination, disciplined preparation, and a fearless willingness to compete against players ranked far above her. She has not been distracted by outside noise or overwhelmed by expectations. She has stayed focused on developing her game and treating every match as an opportunity to grow. That mindset, Grounded, process-driven, humble is precisely the kind of thing Venus has spoken about throughout her entire career. Staying grounded, respecting the process, maintaining perspective regardless of whether the scoreboard is in your favor. So when the tennis world started connecting Venus's comments about Sabalenka to her partnership with Alex, the discussion exploded. Many fans saw it as a direct reflection of the values Venus believes are non-negotiable at the elite level. The core message was simple but powerful. Talent may open doors, but character, resilience, and professionalism are what keep you in the building for the long term. Whether or not Venus intended her remarks to carry that kind of weight, they absolutely did. And they raised a very uncomfortable question for everyone watching, because the story of what happened to Sabalenka at Roland Garros was still very fresh. Sabalenka had entered the French Open as one of the most feared players in the world, a two-time Grand Slam champion with a game built on relentless aggression, overwhelming power, and the ability to seize control of a match from the very first point. When she is on, she does not just beat opponents, she dominates them. Expectations heading into Roland Garros were enormous. Many analysts and fans considered her one of the leading contenders for the title, but the French Open has a habit of exposing things that other surfaces hide. It demands patience. It demands adaptability. It demands emotional resilience in a way that hard courts simply do not. And this time, it exposed something in Sabalenka that almost nobody saw coming.
Her tournament ended far earlier than predicted. The disappointment was immediate and visible. But here's the thing. The defeat itself was not what became the defining story. It was everything that followed. Because instead of the composed, measured response that fans and media had come to expect from a player of her stature, the aftermath felt like a raw, unfiltered public struggle with frustration, exhaustion, and emotional fatigue. In her post-match comments, Sabalenka was strikingly open. She spoke about the weight of the pressure she had been carrying. She admitted the loss had hit her harder than people might expect. She suggested, and this is the part that truly captured everyone's attention, that in that moment, she wanted to walk away from tennis entirely. She questioned whether she still had the desire to keep competing. She described feeling completely overwhelmed by the expectations that accompany being one of the biggest stars in the sport. For many fans, hearing that was genuinely shocking, because on the court, Sabalenka is a force of nature. She projects confidence, intensity, and an almost intimidating fearlessness. She plays like someone who believes she can overpower any human being standing on the other side of the net. And yet, behind that fierce and dominant exterior was an athlete quietly carrying an enormous emotional weight, the toll of competing under constant, unrelenting global scrutiny. Every loss examined, every mistake replayed, every reaction turned into content. The reaction to her comments split the tennis world almost immediately. On one side were the fans and commentators who viewed her honesty as something brave and refreshing, proof that even the strongest athletes in the world are still human beings dealing with real emotions. On the other side were those who questioned whether a player at the very top of the sport should be publicly expressing that level of doubt and frustration. The debate spread fast, and it touched on some genuinely deep questions about mental toughness, accountability, and what the public side of being a professional athlete actually demands. It was exactly the kind of moment that catches the attention of someone like Venus Williams, a woman who spent decades answering those same questions herself under just as much pressure, with just as many eyes watching.
Venus's response drew a very important distinction that a lot of people initially missed. She was not dismissing Sabalenka's emotions. She was not saying those feelings were illegitimate or that struggling after a difficult loss makes someone weak. Her point was far more nuanced than that. Every player who has ever competed at the elite level has experienced painful losses, endured rough stretches, and privately questioned themselves in the dark moments that follow disappointment. That is not unique to Sabalenka. That is what this sport demands from everyone who plays it seriously. The difference, according to Venus, is not whether you feel those things, it is how you choose to handle them, how you process them, how you carry yourself when the cameras are on and the microphones are pointed at your face. And then Venus made her point in the most direct, unapologetic way possible. She acknowledged that Sabalenka's season, despite the pain of Roland Garros, was still one that the vast majority of professional tennis players would trade places for in a heartbeat. The rankings, the prize money, the victories, the opportunities, none of that had disappeared because of one difficult tournament.
and by publicly framing a temporary setback as though it overshadowed everything she had already accomplished, Sabalenka risked something that Venus clearly found troubling. She risked diminishing her own success. Losing perspective, according to Venus, is one of the most dangerous things a champion can do. And then, with the kind of blunt and slightly humorous honesty that has always been part of her personality, Venus delivered the line that instantly went viral. If Sabalenka needed to release that frustration, she said, "Go find a rage room." Direct, unapologetic, completely Venus Williams. And underneath the humor was a serious belief. After 30-plus years in professional tennis, emotional control is not a bonus trait, it is a requirement.
Which brings everything back to Alex. Because when Venus explained why she chose her as a doubles partner in Hamburg, the contrast she was drawing became impossible to ignore. She was not looking for the biggest serve or the most powerful baseline game. She was looking for intelligence, for adaptability, for someone who could change the rhythm of a match, read situations in real time, and make tactical adjustments that go far beyond simply trying to overwhelm an opponent with force. She was looking for someone who plays tennis like a problem to be solved, rather than a battle to be won through sheer will. And Alex, she made clear, is exactly that kind of player. The implicit comparison wrote itself. On one side, a player defined by explosive power and emotional intensity, someone who had just very publicly struggled with the weight of her own expectations. On the other, a player who had experienced her own recent disappointments, her own losses, her own difficult moments, and had processed them quietly, learned from them, and kept moving forward without any public unraveling. Venus was not praising Alex because everything in her career was going perfectly. She was praising her precisely because things had not been perfect, and Alex had handled that with the kind of composure and professionalism that Venus believes every elite athlete must develop. Long careers are not built on talent alone. They are built on resilience, emotional control, and the ability to keep perspective when the results are not going your way. Winning is easy to celebrate. Character, real character, only shows up in defeat. And in Venus Williams' eyes, the way a champion responds to their lowest moments says far more about them than any trophy ever could. That is the standard Venus is holding up, and whether you agree with her or not, you cannot deny she has earned the right to demand it.